North Carolina's season ended in a way that forces an honest conversation. 19-point lead against VCU, gone. An overtime loss and a second straight first round exit from the NCAA tournament. But what's happening now goes beyond that game. Inside Carolina's Greg Barnes and Sherrell McMillan have reported that while no decision has been formally announced, the expectation around the program remains that a change is coming, even if nothing publicly has been announced. Tonight, we're not here to break news or speculate on names. We're here to do what this moment actually calls for: an honest evaluation of the season, a clear understanding of the standard at North Carolina, and a thoughtful conversation about what this program should prioritize as it moves forward. This is the Coast to Coast. I'm Joey Powell for Inside Carolina. Let's get into it. Everybody, what's happening? Nothing going on in our world. Sherrell and Sean and I are kind of bored out of our minds and figured we'd just get together and flip on the old YouTube and see what happens. I kid. This is the Coast to Coast podcast. We're delivered by Salvio's Pizzeria over there in Cary, North Carolina. It's the best thing to come out of Cary, period. Whatever the last pizza they made and delivered outside of the Cary city limits, that was the best thing to come out of Cary. Salvio's Pizza has been sponsoring this show all season long. If you use the code IC20, IC20, they will deliver you an amazing pizza. Fresh ingredients, handmade just for you. I promise the pizza will be so much better than North Carolina's NCAA tournament run this year. Fellas, I also want to call attention to something absolutely amazing. I am not a math guy. Numbers are not really my bag. But since there's 400 and some odd of you joining us tonight live on YouTube, first off, hey, how you doing? Yeah, you. I want to let you know that right now you can join Inside Carolina for 75% off of the normal price. Right? I have seen so many people coming back to IC. Why? Oh, because there seems to be some stories around a potential coaching change. And who does it best? Inside Carolina does. Not only are we your favorite podcast, Inside Carolina has the best coverage, the absolute top of the heap message board community, and news reporting unlike anything else you're going to find. I said on Twitter yesterday, if you're following a coaching search using national news outlets as your sources, you're doing it wrong. Go ahead and join right now, 75% off Inside Carolina. We want you to be a member, and welcome back to everybody who's joining us now. We're glad you're here. Fellas, so much to discuss, so much. There is a ton of folks here to hear us talk about it. First things first, I think we wouldn't be doing our jobs if we did not do a postmortem on the season. And I will start this conversation by saying the loss to VCU did not define the season. Rather, it reflected it. I saw a team that was unable to close out games. I saw offensive stagnation in multiple times, but more importantly, late in the game when they needed it. I saw defensive inconsistency, and I saw issues with identity and rotations on defense. I want to ask both of you the same question. I'll let Sherrell go first since he logged on first tonight. When you look back at the season, what was the most, I guess, consistent or regular issue that this team could not solve?
I think it goes back to the backcourt, honestly. Entering the season, everything we all talked about, fans, media, people, off the record, was just like, what does the backcourt look like, and can it be enough? Is there enough offensive uh, initiation or creation ability within the backcourt? And I think the Kyan Evans experiment didn't go the way I think he wanted, nor UNC wanted, which pushed Derek Dixon into becoming the starting lead guard. And honestly, there were times functionally, I think throughout the season, where really Seth Trimble was the functional offensive initiator, and then Luka did some of it as well. So you have guys whose strength maybe isn't initiation being the primary initiators, because Dixon's strength is more, shooting, He's a decent passer, solid passer, but there just wasn't anybody who was able to, when the shot clock was going, down, was it 9 or 8 or 7, who could consistently, I want to add consistently, get to the rim. I think Trimble did it a lot. Luca did it sometimes, but they both had their struggles at times finishing. And then Evans and Dixon just didn't finish at all. I mean, Dixon was, I think, around 30% from two, and I think Kyan hit 1 2 pointer in ACC play. I think that's correct. So basically, you had guards who got in the lane and really couldn't do anything. So from an offensive standpoint, to me, that was the story of the season, and it's what a lot of people talked about over the summer and as the season started. So that was the to me that was a big thing that just consistently happened.
Up over 600 now. Y'all tell your friends. Let's have a record-setting night here on a Sunday as we ease into the off season. Sean, same question, man. What was the biggest recurring theme for you this season?
Well, I agree with agree with Sherrell, but for me, I guess two additional things. One was the shooting. We talked ad nauseum about the 3-point shooting, what would that look like over the summer, and individually, we thought certain players would have it. Kind Evans being one of them. But you look at the 3-point shooting against VCU, 8 threes made. So that's the number that we've always been talking about for years, but on 29 attempts. So that percentage is not going to get it done. Henry Vasar led the way from a 3-point shooting percentage, both in VCU and for the season. And what he did from a jump perspective from Arizona to at UNC was pretty remarkable. But he was really the only one that did it consistently. Dixon hit shots, but you're going to Jaron Stevenson for a primetime shot. He hit it against UVA, but you're going to him on the left wing, a 30% shooter at the end of the day. And the guys weren't able to shoot consistently. I think 161st. So right in that mid tier of Division One. And coming off of last year, I think the hope was not being a top 10 or 20, but being a pretty solid team from three. And then defensively, how many times do we see it over and over? Wake Forest, Syracuse, et cetera, giving up big leads. But to me, it felt like the Stanford game all over again, which we thought we had got away from, where all of a sudden you have a guard that you can't do anything against. And no matter, it just felt VCU was going to score every time down. And the defense had gotten a lot better. It was better in the first half, but VCU found a mismatch, isolation on Jaron, and UNC did not try to, or they weren't able to solve for that. And at the end of the day, I think the defensive identity was what brought UNC down and gave up that 19 point lead, but more importantly, that lead in the last 4 to 5 minutes, especially, and I'm sure we'll get into it, but that possession to end the first half was telling of how the second half could go. I think gave them a little confidence how easy that was. And then the tying basket at the end of regulation, you couldn't ask for an easier jaunt to the basket on that one as well. So 3-point shooting and defense to me.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And shout out to everybody who's in the chat tonight. Go tell your friends, come hang out. Sherrell, you want to add on to that?
Oh, well, one, jaunt is a very great word. So well done there, Sean. But the other thing you talked about the defense, and it goes to, with the guards, in that they also struggle to stop people from getting in the lane. So like you have a team that's built around the 4 and the 5, but you have not all the guards, but you have guards who couldn't keep anybody from getting in the lane and couldn't get in the lane themselves. And that's just like a huge recipe for disaster. I think at some point, there was just a string of guards who all had like career highs or near career highs against Carolina. So that goes back to, that is just the guards just, as a unit, just were not good enough this season. And to me, that was the fatal flaw.
Yeah, and it seemed like every time North Carolina figured out how to fix one of their issues, another coach would exploit something else and keep going to it. I mean, you guys have talked about how VCU was kind of a reflection of the season in a nutshell. I mean, how many times at the end of the game did Terrence Hill go to his right? Right? Like, I don't know why UNC wasn't sitting on his right hand. And honestly, we could, if we wanted to literally just pick things that happened in that VCU game that are just real head scratchers for a coaching staff that is in its 5th year or just finishing up its 5th year, I think we could spend a 2-hour show just doing that. And there's just so much, and everybody that's in the chat is blowing up with a lot of things that they're pointing out, and I think a lot of them have credence to them. Um, I feel like the season probably was an underperformance as well. I know folks had expectations, especially after that, the way North Carolina blitzed Kansas. Um, I think folks had some expectations because they saw what this team could be. But then you had the injury issues kind of derail things and mess with chemistry a little bit. Uh, and even though Seth Trimble came back and played 2/3 of the season, you still lost Caleb Wilson for a third of the season. You lost Henry Vasar for a couple of games right there in the middle. And it just really, it seemed like things never seemed to get right. But North Carolina was trending that way when they were healthy, right? I think that's something that Greg has pointed out prior to the VCU game. North Carolina was trending towards where they landed when they went to the West Coast and lost to Cal and lost to Stanford. So I would ask you guys, with regard to this season and recognizing, as we said back in October, that there was going to have to be some guy, they were going to have to hit on all of the transfer portal guys, and y'all referenced a couple that did not play out. Was this season less than expected, or was this season about where they should have got, considering how much they were risking on guys developing into a next level? Sean.
Great question. And once again, it's hard to say what it could have been with Caleb Wilson, who was a second team All-American despite missing, however many the last games, and especially coming off the biggest win of the season. And yeah, they lost to Miami, but that was a game he got hurt in. So I feel we didn't fully get to see what it could have been. Now, obviously, you have a lot of examples to point to of some highs and some lows, so that inconsistency was there. Sherrell did it a few weeks ago, but going back through the preseason predictions, I think a lot of us were in that same 7 to 8 loss record going into the tournament. I think I had them as a 6 seed, but also having them get to the Elite 8. So that was showing, hey, there's going to be some losses along the way, but there's a higher ceiling. But I think all you have to do is go back to the NC State game where you're missing your 2 best players, which is huge, but it just showed what a big gap there was between second team All-American, Henry Vasar, who was playing at an elite level, and then everybody else from just a size, speed, athleticism, and skill perspective. And we talked about those 4 attributes last year and what they needed to get in the portal. And at the end of the day, it was lacking in those areas. So I'm not, I would have loved to see them play Illinois. I think they could have given them a game, but losing the first weekend, I think, is probably how we saw it without Caleb Wilson. But it goes once again to hitting on Henry, needing to not hit on everybody, but needing to do better across different areas because they were severely lacking. I think you saw a lot of the teams continue playing this weekend that had that athleticism. Last thing before jumping to Sherrell, I think I had Kansas as a must-win just to have UNC in that conversation early on, which they did, but the Michigan State game and some of those other early ACC games brought it back to that level that we've unfortunately become accustomed to of outside the top 10, outside a contending team. And it's the hard part of the portal where you can have great hits. One thing can, nobody saw what Nick Boyd would have been, but if he had committed, who's to say what this team could have turned into it? So it's no different than watching a game. One possession can make a huge difference in the course of a long season.
And I think this is the first time that North Carolina's really had to deal with injuries. But again, I think it's hard to understand just how much of a risk this roster was walking into it. Sherrell, do you want to reset maybe your expectation coming into the season about how you thought guys would materialize? You mentioned the missing on Evans. You missed Bogovic's kind of, being what he was. Where do you feel like the end of the season, does the end of the season accurately reflect what you think the roster was?
Yeah, I keep saying confounding because it really is. I'm still trying to figure out how to judge it. Like, it wasn't good enough. I think that's the baseline. We all understand that. But it's weird because I think everyone is like, yeah, it wasn't good enough in a season where they beat Kentucky, Kansas, Duke, Louisville, Virginia, where they beat, excuse me, some really good programs, one of which on the road that they really never went on the road. But then, they had two of the worst defensive performances in Carolina, history in the last 20 years um, against on the West Coast trip. So it's like, I don't know. It was a weird season. The record ended up being about what we thought, but it just didn't. They didn't get there the way we thought they were going to get there. So that's weird. I don't want to put it all on Kyle Evans because he's not the first shooter or mid-major guy to come to Carolina and just look like they have no confidence, and then a year later go somewhere and look great. So I don't know if it is Hubert Davis's system, if he wasn't put in a position to succeed, or what it was, but it's usually never one side or the other. It's kind of like both things working together that cause those kind of massive drops in numbers and shooting percentage and all that. So, for me, like I said, it's just a confounding year. I don't really know another way to say it. I do think it's funny, to maybe not funny is not the right word, but to go back in maybe 10 or 15 years, once the dust has settled, they beat Clemson on a Tuesday night, right? And they're 5-1, I think, at that point without Luka Bogovac, and they played some of the, or excuse me, without Caleb Wilson. Luka Bogovac had a great game that night against Clemson, but they're playing really good defense. Bogovac seems to be coming into his own. Caleb Wilson, we found out, was coming back to practice, had planned to play against Duke. It's all looking great, and then Caleb Wilson, has the injury. They don't win another game. So it's just like that's going to go down, maybe not as one of the great what ifs, but another one of those what ifs. And I think, to Sean's point, it just showed in those three games that they lost to end the year how the roster just wasn't built with enough difference makers. If you listen to Jason Staples, do football stuff, he's always talking about difference makers, difference makers. Do you have, three or four on defense? Do you have three or four on offense? And I think it got to the point with Carolina that they had like 1.5 to 2 each game, depending on who was on. And that's just not enough to compete in the upper echelon of college basketball.
Yeah, and so let's go ahead and lean into this. Sherrill, I know confounding is driving you crazy. I would also have accepted bumfuzzling. It's a decent word to express confusion or frustration at confusion. So let's go ahead and talk about the elephant in the room, the Hubert Davis era. Looking at the arc, right? 2022 Final Four national title game, two of the biggest wins in program history. Since then, a missed tournament, inconsistent results, taking a preseason number one to not getting into the big dance at all, then back-to-back early exits that have been situations where North Carolina either got way behind and came back and wasn't enough, or got way ahead and gave the game away. I feel like the ceiling has been proven, and that has nothing to do with the historical standard. I mean, the ceiling for this team was shown at one point, but I don't know that the program can live near it under this staff. So as we mentioned at the top, Greg Barnes is reporting that there is expected to be a change in the staff at North Carolina. So I want to ask each one of you guys, Sherrill, you'll get the first one. At this point, what matters more in evaluating a coach at North Carolina? The peaks or the pattern?
I would say the pattern, because what has made North Carolina is that they're in it every year. So, I mean, there are other programs who have had peaks, but they're not considered North Carolina because they haven't had consistent winning over the course of, I guess now, 65 years, pretty much 60 years. So I think it's more about having those seasons where you're 29-4 or 30-3, being a number 2 or a number 1 seed, making the Sweet 16, being in it, being in the conversation every year. And in the last 5 years, they've been in the conversation for a month at the end of the year, the first time, for a month before the season, the next year, the whole season, his third year, to their credit, and then not really the last 2 years, like on the fringe this year of being elite, but really in that tier 2, tier 3, and then last year, not in nobody considered them a real threat last year. So um, you just have to be good. You have to be top tier every year. And I think people will live with the NCAA tournament results. It's funny because it used to be that like when it used to be to me, it felt like people were like, well, whatever happens in the tournament is how we're defining the season. And then when UNC's tournament success started to win away, it was like, well, we want to be good during the year, and the tournament's a crapshoot. But I think it has to be in the middle. I think you have to give yourself the opportunity to be in it in the second weekend every single year, and the best way to do that is getting number one seeds and two seeds and three seeds, not 6, 8, 11 and 8. That's not the way to go about it. So to answer your question, I think it has to be just every year you're in an elite team, you're always in the top 15, and eventually if you're always in the top 15, you'll break through at least to make multiple Final Fours. I don't think there's been any program who's like top 15 pretty much every year who hasn't at least made a Final Four. And for me, just speaking for myself, Final Fours are like the ultimate harbinger of success, because once you get to the Final Four, crazy stuff happens all the time. To like get to the Final Four, I'm satisfied usually no matter what.
Yeah, and getting there just seems like such a far cry for this program right now, which is one of the reasons that we're having this conversation. Sean, I'd ask you: are you on the same side of Sherelle? Is it about raising the ceiling, or is it about maintaining some sort of proximity to said ceiling?
Well, I think you want the ceiling at the championship caliber ceiling. Is it realistic to have it year in and year out in the portal? Probably not, but I think it goes to evaluations and to identity. And I think those things, you can look at any of the offensive or defensive stats and you can see the fluctuations, which I get some happens with very different personnel, but it just goes to that lack of identity. And I think somebody on the message boards earlier this week said, well, their lack of identity is their lack of turnovers and inability to force turnovers. Well, you probably need a lot more stronger things than that. And if you had that, I think you could create that consistent approach. And without that consistency throughout these 5 seasons, you've had, up until this year, UNC extremely struggling in any Q1 games, especially against SEC opponents where they're a little quicker, more athletic. So November and December's have been, you're just fighting uphill. And luckily the ACC in general has been pretty weakened over those years, so that you are able to kind of regroup on the wins perspective. But then you see what used to be a 1 seed, 2 seed, even in the down years, 6 to 8. Now you're struggling to get into the tournament. We're talking about quad 1 wins, 6 seeds, etc. And once again, going back to that Kansas game being a must win, being to keep UNC in that conversation was just because they really haven't been in there outside of getting hot in the tournament in 2022, or they did get the 1 seed, 3 years ago, but they've been relatively out of the longer conversation of top teams. And I think UNC, to establish that consistency, that's what needs to happen to get in there, and then the rest will take care of itself.
So I want to talk about the standard at North Carolina. And this is where I think a lot of the fan base is fully on board with making a change. It's easy for outsiders in the national media to say, well, the Virginia Commonwealth game is what got North Carolina to fire Hubert. I don't think that's true at all. I don't think any decision about making a change in the coaching staff happened because of VCU. I think VCU was kind of the last, or the straw that broke the camel's back, to where North Carolina's leadership and folks that donate big bucks just realized that, oh gosh, this is not getting better anytime soon. And if you think about the standard at North Carolina, we've talked about it here earlier tonight, but we've also talked about it in other episodes of the show. It's sustained competitiveness. It's consistent advancement in the NCAA tournament. It's national relevance. It's program stability. It's not these isolated runs to a title game. It's not uneven seasons where you're losing to teams that are, ranked in the low 200s in KenPom. For me, it's not that the standard isn't clear. It's that it's already been set, and it is clear to everybody outside of the program. I'll ask y'all, is the current gap between North Carolina and that standard significant, or is the gap just inconsistent? Sean?
I think right now it's significant because you can really look at the last 7 years, going back to the COVID year of 2020, and there's just such a stark difference between the team performance from that point, and that's counting 2 Roy Williams years plus the 5 Hubert Davis years to what it was before. Now I think you can get there quickly because that 14 million number, that's what everybody's going to care about these days, is what can you spend on players. And it might not get to a Kentucky 20 million plus, or as these numbers continue to increase over and over, it might not get to that number one standpoint, but if it can remain in the top, that's going to help. But then it does come back to the identity of being able to build that both from a playing style, but as well as the evaluation style. And I think that's been the hard part when, 2 years ago you have Drake Powell, Ian Jackson, even Elliot Cadeau from that class who was a year above. You lose them before they can really make a difference. You're bringing in guys left and right. Even this upcoming year, right, of who's going to be back, it might be a whole another squad because you've lost that foundation. So I think in general, looking at it in that context, is that it's significant right now. I mean, just looking across the road to what has been done in Michigan, et cetera, but it can come back pretty quickly, especially if you have the financial means and the right personnel in place to do so.
924 of y'all in here right now. Hey, glad you're here. Thanks for joining us on a Sunday evening. I know there's still ball happening, but yeah, it was just the North Carolina basketball program that we cover and so many people love. We're at a crossroads, and I think there's a lot of discussion to be had. Sherrell, I'll ask you the same thing. Is North Carolina really far away from the standard, or is just the standard, or is North Carolina's place versus the standard, just an ebb and a flow at this moment?
I'm sorry, I'm not picking on you. I'm just so tired of hearing quote the standard. Like it's fresh. No, it's not you. It's just that like everybody's talking about like the standard, and nobody knows what it is because we're not the ones making the decisions. So it's like the people in charge are the ones who are setting the standard, right? And I've said this on the message board before. I've said this everywhere else. Like when you hire someone, and this isn't personal against Hubert Davis, but when you hire someone who's never been a coach or a head coach before, you are lowering the standard by definition. So the hope was that he would be able to get it back to where, it should be in a couple of years. That clearly hasn't happened, but I don't know how anyone can argue that the standard hasn't been lowered. Like that makes no sense to me.
All right, hang on.
So
I'm going to give you a quote for the standard.
Okay.
This is from Steve Newmark, North Carolina's incoming athletic director, on the school's official podcast with Jones Angel and Adam Lucas recently, when talking about the arena discussion. North Carolina needs elite players, elite coaches, and elite resources. That sounds like standard setting to me. So I will hand it back to you, Sherrell. See if does that give you a little bit more context to answer the question.
Well, they've had some elite players. I think it's clear they didn't have an elite head coach. Like that's pretty obvious. Elite resources, they don't have those. When I say they don't have those, I think in totality of what resources are compared to other programs. I know we all view Carolina as this house on the hilltop that everyone looks up towards, but there are a lot of areas in which they just are behind the game. A lot of areas where they're still or where they need to catch up with some of their SEC counterparts. You talk about like facilities and weight room and a lot of that stuff that's behind the scenes. It's not where it needs to be. So I don't think they have elite resources, and I think that's what Steve Newmark and Lee Roberts and Bubba Cunningham, until his time is up, that's what they have to work towards, is to make sure there are those elite resources, because the elite resources will make sure that you get the elite coach, and the elite coach's job is to use those elite resources to get you elite players. And if you don't have all three of those, I think that's where you get into the inconsistency. You get to the point where you're having the ups and downs. So I think they are where UNC is now versus the standard is, it's It's not close. They're a few exits away. Let's put it that way. If they're on the interstate, they're a long way away from their exit.
Yeah,
And the good thing, though, to spin it positively, is that in the history of college athletics and really sports, there's never been this ability to completely transform your team and your roster in the matter of a couple of weeks. It's easier than ever to go from 8-20 one year to 20-8 the next year, if that's the goal. I mean, Jay Lucas did it down in Miami. Gone are the days where you inherit a team. There's 13 scholarships. 7 of the guys are sophomores, and they don't want to sit out a year, so they stay, and you have to turn over the roster over the course of 3 or 4 years. The timeline is accelerated because there's so much more movement. So it's not a situation where Carolina is permanently, kind of a tier 2 program. It can change very quickly. I look back at, and I hate to make this comparison, but I'm going to do it anyway because we're just talking. Look at Alabama in 2007, man. Football. They were struggling. They had been through, I think they had been through an alum. They had tried another guy, somebody's
was it
son.
Mike
and
Riley,
just-
the guy that was that was caught doing some really garbage stuff with people on tape? Anyway, go ahead.
yeah,
That's where
it
they
was just
were.
it was a lot of stuff going on, and they weren't Alabama football. It just wasn't anymore. They hadn't won a national championship since I think 1992 at that point, so it had been 16 years. And then what did they do? They hired Nick Saban, and they dominate like nobody's ever dominated for about 15, I guess 12, 13 years. So it can happen very quickly. And even then, Saban didn't have the transfer portal where he could just pick guys, and bring people from former teams or whatever. So yes, they are not where they need to be from a standard perspective, but it's not a long road to get there. We're not talking about 4 or 5 years to get back. They can get back. They could be back next year, if things work out the way that some people hope. So, yes, far away, but it doesn't mean they're far away, if that makes sense.
So, Mike Price, yes, not Mike Riley. Thank you guys for correcting me on that. I knew it was Mike something or another, and I knew it was hilarious when he got popped doing the things he was doing because he was a very average coach.
Joey, sorry to interrupt. I know,
Sorry.
I know you hate it. The standard also on the court of, and I think we all got used to Roy Williams, but the standard was UNC's might not out athlete you, but they're gonna run it down your throat, and you're not going to be able to keep up with them. And to me, that was a standard of from physically and mentally that you're more prepared and you're better than the opponent. And VCU, you're playing, you're not subbing, and you have VCU getting turnovers, getting the rebound. They're beating you down the court. They're outrunning you. And once again, that wasn't UNC's identity, but it to me, standards of excellence also go to that of being just so much more superior in certain areas than others, and that's what you do, and teams can't do anything about it. And that also goes to identity. So that's something I would love to see UNC get back to, and whatever focuses those are. But that's also been missing, over the last 5 to 7 years as well.
And it's been hard for North Carolina fans, and I get this, to watch a program 8 miles down the road hand off their blue blood machine to a coach who had never been a head coach before. That was an alum that had been in the NBA for a short period of time, but had been an assistant for quite some time. And it's hard to not look at those two things and compare them together. So let's reset where we know we are right now. I know we are close to Johnny T-shirt because the interweb is a thing. JohnnyT-shirt.com. Go see them. Go online. Get your gear. Doesn't matter who the coach at North Carolina is. You can still get 10% off your order at Johnny T-shirt by using the code found on the message boards. Johnny T-shirt have been longtime supporters of North Carolina back to, probably 4 coaches ago, back to prior to the Doherty era, probably even actually. I know Johnny T-shirt was open when Dean Smith was coaching because I came to Chapel Hill for a college visit and went to Johnny T-shirt. Johnny T-shirt has been supporting IC for a long time. Hit them up, go see them. They are big time supporters of this here podcast. So we want to make sure you guys show them some love. So let's talk about what we know about the coaching situation. Greg Barnes and Sherrell have been on top of this for quite some time. I don't know where national guys are getting their stories, but it's funny to me that those stories come after, Greg and Sherrell report things. What we know right now is no official decision has been announced. There's no idea that players or staff know anything. Um, there kind of is the expectation that there's going to be a change internally at North Carolina. And as you hear these national echo chambers, you can see where the momentum is going. So publicly, nothing has changed. Privately, there appears to be a clear direction as kind of where things are moving. Um, Sherelle, what does a moment like this feel like? How does this feel inside of a program when things like this are going down? I mean, I you tell me what is. I don't want to get speculative. I'd rather you get observational for me. But what does this feel like inside of a program like North Carolina when they are at this sort of precipice of poop or get off the can?
Um, there's a lot of communication between a lot of people, which inevitably leads to a lot of miscommunication between a lot of people. So it's trying to suss out like what is, what is I'm right now speaking from a reporting perspective, like what is accurate, what can be confirmed, what can't be confirmed. So it's like that's on the reporting side of it. Like for the people in the Smith Center, I mean, we always talk about jobs and the human element and empathy. It's like they're trying to figure out how long they're going to get paid, like if they're losing their jobs, if they do lose their jobs, what's that look like? What's their future? I mean, because a lot of the people who have been there have been with the program for quite some time. So I think mostly, especially the folks who aren't Hubert Davis, that is what they're dealing with. It's just like the kind of I guess you would call it a lack of information, kind of just waiting for the inevitable, waiting for the other shoe to drop, and you don't know if or when it's coming. So that's not fun. But I think that's what a lot of those folks in the Smith Center are dealing with. Overall, with the program, there's just just buzz because there's all kinds of people trying to get information. There's all kinds of people, in some cases, trying to give information. There are power players trying to position themselves or position other people. So there's just a lot of stuff, a lot of managing that has to happen at the very highest executive levels. So it's just I hate to say just a lot going on, but that's really what it is. It's just constant conversations, constant checking in and understanding where things are and how they might move and where they might move and when they might move and all that stuff. So I don't want to say chaos because that's not quite the word I'm looking for, but like heavily involved, maybe. If you can think of a word that's chaos but doesn't necessarily have a negative connotation, that's the word
Heavy
I would
traffic.
use.
Heavy traffic. You think about how rush hour looks, right? Yeah, there's sometimes vendor benders on the side of the road, but it's just congested. There's a lot going on. And if you think about, I know there's probably a lot of folks in the fan base that wish this was announced like a long time ago, or is antsy that there hasn't been any sort of announcement yet. Um, Speed doesn't really help North Carolina in this place, especially if the end result doesn't change. What North Carolina has to do in these situations is cross T's, dot I's, make sure that people are taken care of. Because you think about there's a human element of this, and Greg has reported this, and Sherrell's reported this. There has to be some sort of respect paid to North Carolina's history in the way that this is handled. So, wanting this to be made public, that doesn't change that North Carolina is probably going to be looking for a new coach. It's just, doing things internally the right way is important. And I think as somebody who has been through a job change, if it's not handled well, things can go sideways. And yeah, you always have to take into account the person that's involved here, in addition to all of the other machinations that are going to happen. I think something that's really important, for fans that are watching this, and we just got over 1,000. What's up, y'all? Well done. We're over 1,018 right now on a Sunday evening. As we talk about what North Carolina should prioritize for a potential next coach, we're not going to do names, we're not going to speculate, but I do think it's important to talk about some core traits, right? Those things could be program stability, they could be roster construction clarity, they could be player development, defensive identity, late game structure, all that kind of stuff. And then you figure all of the NIL things and trying to, you know, reestablish North Carolina to what the brand is supposed to be. Um, I think there's a lot of meat on the bone to discuss there. Sherelle, why are you laughing? What I say?
No, somebody in the chat, they're talking about coaches, and somebody said, "Why not Bob Knight?" And I
Oh
was
yeah,
just was like,
Bob Knight, no longer with us. R.I.P.
I don't,
So
I don't mean to laugh at that. I'm sorry.
that's fine. Sorry, I didn't. I thought I said something. It turns out it was somebody in the chat dropping funny bombs. So I would ask both of y'all, what do you feel like from what we know about this search is the most important thing? And you can give me a 1 or a 1A or maybe a 1 or a 2. But there are some things that North Carolina absolutely has to do right. And basketball coaching succession planning is one of them. I don't think it's probably at damn near the top of the list. So Sherelle, as far as priorities for a replacement, what are you what are you laughing? You still laughing at that?
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Okay,
Priorities
all
for a
right.
replacement.
Get your life together.
If
Yeah, just
if
tell me,
that
what do you think to replace from where North Carolina is right now? Help me understand what you think has to be a trait in, and I'll give you another second while I couch this. Greg and Sherelle have reported that North Carolina is looking for an experienced, proven, successful coach. So take with that what you will. All right, Sherelle, top priorities.
I'm sorry, the chat is cracking me up. Nick from Blue Chips is hilarious. Neon Bordeaux is coming. Uh, it has to be one. You have to be fluent in all the things that it takes to be a head coach today, and a lot of those, I would say, the majority of those, occur away from the basketball court, away from the practice court. So you have to fundraise. You have to be involved with NIL. You have to sell the program. And if you don't do those three things, then you're already putting yourself behind. So somebody who is, I would say, fluent in head coach 2026 is that's like baseline. Have to have that. I think, and then the other thing for me, and I won't get into too many details, but aside from that, an identity. Maybe that's the biggest thing over the last 5 years is that you just weren't sure. Like to Sean's point, you knew they weren't going to turn the ball over a ton and they weren't going to force any turnovers. But is that a real identity, or is that just kind of something that you don't like, or a style you play? That's not really, style and identity are different to me. But that's the biggest thing. If you look at all the top coaches, really basically forever, there's something that you associate with, oh, that Sean Moran's team, no matter what, they could be playing the Lakers or they could be playing, Weddington High School. They're going to do this thing. And I don't think you could really ever answer that question about UNC. So identity to me is the biggest thing. And then fluency in all the things that have come about over the last 5 years when it comes to NIL, fundraising, and selling the program.
I think that's one of the things that at least I've been banging a drum about for North Carolina is, in year 5, what is the identity of a Hubert Davis basketball team? And I don't know that you can point to one other than inconsistency. Like you said, Sean, turnover ratio maybe, but so Sean, I'd ask you, what are you looking for if you're Steve Newmark right now and you're expecting to make a change? Tell me who you think, who or not who you think, but what type of coach you think you're going for.
I was getting excited for a second.
No,
I think, innovation comes to my mind of you have the proven coach, but especially in this day and age, and innovation, I think, goes from a tactical standpoint on the court. Go back to Dean Smith, innovation and UNC, those were two words that were synonymous with each other. And, I think there's a lot, especially now where the offensive sets are so intricate in terms of the style of play and what you're calling and the reads and actions, et cetera. Same thing defensively, of what type of style and the players that you're putting together. So I think, we've seen the ebbs and flows of how, especially in college, how it's not the NBA where every team is playing the same for the most part, but there's a lot of different styles. So I think you have to be at the forefront where people are trying to copy what you're doing. And to me, innovation goes to that tactical perspective, but then also when you're utilizing your staff or analytics, how are you trying to, especially with the budgets or the NIL resources going into it? Sure, at UNC, you're going to be able to buy at a certain level, but to create depth, you also have to find those underrated gems. So, what are you doing that you're staying a step ahead to identify those players? You're getting on them early, and you're building a cohesive team, and all that comes back to innovation across the board, and being a leader in terms of the coaching field versus a follower, and staying one step ahead, especially if you're not always able to outspend, or even at the beginning. Maybe UNC isn't in that top tier where somebody who has Duke or UConn, even if the money's the same, they're going to go to those schools. So you have to be able to overcome that at the beginning. And to me, that just goes through, once again, the style of play, identity that we've all been talking about, but then also from a scouting perspective, what type of players, what type of kids are you looking for, and the staff that you're putting together to do that. I think you see a lot of offensive and defensive coordinators. Is that something that we would see? I don't know if that's 100% necessary, but is something you're seeing across the board at some of the top schools, being able to divvy those out. So once again, as you get a new coach, you're looking at larger staff and different responsibilities, and making sure that things all flow up, and you have a guy who can delegate but can kind of synthesize all that information and be able to react in the right ways time and time again.
Joey, let me jump in.
Yeah, go ahead.
What you said, Sean, about stat. That's another thing that, whatever happens moving forward, there has to be an investment. You talked about elite resources, Joey. There has to be an investment into the basketball program. It doesn't have to be, I would say, it doesn't have to be at the same scale as football, but it needs to be relative to what basketball is at UNC. Because there are things that, I don't think it's why ultimately the 5 years with Hubert Davis have been the way they've been. But there are things that they don't have, like we mentioned earlier, that a lot of programs have. And there just needs to be a complete, I would say, reimagining of what a basketball program looks like in 2026, because I don't know that the Carolina program was designed to be one in 2026. It's kind of what it's always been. And that's been solid. It's been okay, but you have to be structured different, and you have to do different things in this day and age to be able to compete with the programs who are perennially at the top. And I'd like to see that. Whatever happens moving forward, I'd like to see the athletic department fully invest in the basketball program, because it's worthy of investment. And it's too long. It's operated as like, we'll make do, and we're Carolina, we'll figure it out. But no, you pumped resources into other sports, and you need to pump resources into basketball in the same way. And I think the results will follow.
Yeah, and I would encourage anybody who's in here, almost 1,100 of y'all, and like, good Lord, I love this. Where y'all been? Come hang out. We have fun. Um, there's also a big arena discussion happening right now, and it is getting closer and closer on the horizon. I think it's important to think about that in the context of North Carolina as a basketball product, right? How do you sell that to corporation as potential sponsors? How do you sell that to, donors that you're asking to contribute multi-million dollars to either endow a scholarship or help shore up, initial investments on that sort of project? The product on the court matters. And that was, a lot of the same wording you heard when North Carolina made the big swing with hiring Bill Belichick in football. Regardless of what Bill Belichick does on the field, North Carolina made a splash by hiring him. If you can look at that in the same context as North Carolina needing to nail this basketball transition well, I think that'll give folks a little bit of peace of mind, but also help give them a little bit of a frame of reference for how important it is, not just to get the organization back to where it's been for so long and where it perceives itself, but where it needs to be financially to succeed as they have these other things coming down the pike. What do you guys feel like has been missing the most in the last 5 years from this program? I think you guys laid out some things that North Carolina needs to find in a new coach. What do you guys feel like has been missing the most? One of the things that and I'll give you a couple of seconds to think about it. One of the things that I've always struggled with is, and I'll go back to Steve Newmark's comment about, North Carolina needs elite coaches. Would Hubert Davis be one of the top, 10 coaches considered if there were an open job at another big school, right? Is he the sort of coach that somebody else would look for if they were going to hire someone? And I think that's important to think about. I'm not trying to crap on Hubert Davis. I'm just pointing out, like, if North Carolina says it wants to be elite, they have to look at it from less of a family-based lens. So, Sean, I'll throw to you first. What do you feel like has been lacking the most under Hubert Davis's leadership?
Once again, I think each year is probably a different aspect of that. But I think the ability to, and they did it great 2 years ago when they had the 1 seed, and that was where they had a foundation to build from, and they were able to, put, incoming freshmen and some transfers together. But now that it's gotten to, you have one returning guy and not, it got to be a little too much in terms of what you're bringing in and how you're trying to create a team. But it goes back to what Sherrell was talking about for this season of, I think, the ability to get, Raymond Felton, Ty Lawson, Kendall, you can go on down the point guard list, and just having a guy that can control the game, get into the paint, from an athleticism perspective is really important. So you can talk about offensively, and then having the shooters to be able to kick out to, just a few years ago where you could watch teams and they're basically playing a zone, 4 in the paint, 3 in the paint, etc. So it goes to certain weaknesses of the players, and not that you're going to have 40% shooters across the board, but you need to have that elite or close to elite talent level across the board. And then defensively, UNC's never been Tony Bennett, or you can go through some of the top schools that rely fully on defense, but you can't have, I think each year we've gone through it of, hey, what is going on defensively, from they're switching everything to, they're switching 1 through 4, they're playing drop cover, so there was a different identity, and even throughout the seasons, different things that were tried. And sometimes that's going to go to personnel, but other times it's going to go to what are you practicing and what are your non-negotiables from a defensive standpoint. And, I think at the end of the day, on both sides of the ball, that inconsistency and lack of identity led to a lot of what we're talking about now in terms of what are the biggest, challenges that we've seen.
Sherrell, what are you missing the most? And you can get personal here as somebody who's watched Carolina for your entire life. Like, what do you feel like has been missing the most?
Fun, joy. There's no,
Man, we
no.
talked
I'm talking
about
about
joy earlier this year. I wholeheartedly agree.
I'm talking about from the players. It just seems like it's a grind. Over the last 5 years, there have been very few instances or stretches where it feels like they were truly having fun. And maybe that is the change now with, all these guys they're employees. Like, we can call them what they want, but they're paid employees of the basketball program at their respective schools. So maybe it's because of that. But it just, even 5 years ago, like it was, I feel like they were having fun. They enjoyed it. It was fun to come out and play. And you saw guys jumping up and down, and, and Caleb Wilson, I think, brought a lot of that this year. So I don't want to say it's like completely gone, but it wasn't there every night. And not just talking about him specifically, but just the team as a whole. Obviously, there's instances like, for example, the number 1 seed team, they seemed like they had fun. They seemed like they enjoyed it. They really liked being together. But that is just 1 year out of 5. And even the team who made it to the Final Four and to the national championship game, there were chemistry problems from the start with those guys. And it wasn't until some things happened off the court that it crystallized who was going to play, and they took off. So even those first 3 months, all the way back at I think it was Hubert's second month, you had Brady Mannix being like, what's going on here? Like, all this talent, and these guys are just kind of, in a press conference. That was Davis had been the coach for 10 games, 12 games, and that had already happened with Mannix. So, and that has been, I don't want to say a through line, but that's happened several times over the past few years. So I don't know exactly what caused it, but just the lack of joy and the lack of fun consistently. Again, it's happened in in spade, in stretches, but not consistently. So that's kind of what I miss, like guys like having fun. But it could just be that's an era that's completely gone because they're all highly paid.
So, last thing I want to touch on before we close up shop tonight. For a long time, North Carolina, and I still think there's a ton of fans making suggestions about North Carolina keeping it in the family and hiring somebody who, is a Carolina guy. And some people who've been critical of Hubert Davis have pointed to that as being an issue. I have heard agents say that, while some people might think it's really cool that he hired everybody who had gone here, and that was kind of his philosophy, he wanted people to have that Carolina experience, that it doesn't work anymore to really get most kids, for all various reasons. Uh, and so when you're thinking about keeping it in the family, I mean, I've said a couple times recently, I feel like North Carolina's coaching family tree right now is a wreath. And so I would ask either one of you guys, what's your what is your way to help folks understand that, hey, it doesn't always have to be somebody who has played or coached in North Carolina to be the next person to lead North Carolina. Sean, I'll let you take that.
Well, I think it's been that way for so many years, but I think from a family perspective, one, as you said, the branch has dried up. So there's not, there's not the Roy Williams in waiting. But I think from a Carolina family perspective, which is what I grew up on and, hearing about in the 90s and has continued, with or without the NBA players, is from a coaching, that the next coach that comes in, how does he bring the family into the fold? And you can quickly accept people into the family if they have the right attributes and are living up to the high quality of standards and principles that were established. So I think you can have somebody that's out of the family, but maybe they're bringing a lot of those principles that Dean Smith had or Roy Williams had. And I think things can be solved for pretty quickly. I think the main thing is that you want whoever, obviously it is going to be somebody outside of the family, and you want them to bring people into the fold versus pushing them away. And I think to me, that's one of the more important things. And now you can hire an elite coach. He's brought into the fold. He brings the alumni, the fans with him. And, we're not, in 6 months, we're not talking about the concerns of the Carolina family. Obviously it would be nice, but it's not going to exist right now. So to me, it goes down to the type of coach and the energy they're bringing. And once again, that innovation, and can you bring UNC principles to that UNC family and be brought right back into the fold once you have a winning team and people are excited and happy to go watch what you're doing on the court.
Yeah, man. All right, Cheryl, I'm gonna let you have the last crack at that one.
Give me the question again.
Just with regard to the family aspect and Carolina's insistence on it at some times, how do you feel like North Carolina should spin that or sell that to the fan base as they move forward? I just don't know that there's an option within, quote, the family right now. So I'm going to ask you, how do you feel like the forward thinking response to that sounds?
I would say, do you want to win, or do you want to just keep doing what you're doing? Because you've won some, but we're here talking about how the program is not meeting the quote unquote standard, and it's with a Carolina guy. I would ask you, Joey, where did Coach Smith go to college?
He went to Kansas, sir, and he was
Where did Coach? Go ahead.
he was not a North Carolina guy until he was.
Where did Coach Guthridge go to school, Joey?
He went to Kansas State, Sherrell.
Mm-hmm. So the family thing is great, and there's a way to bring the principles of everything that Carolina basketball has been and meant to so many people for the last 60 years. But the baseline for all of that, none of that happens without winning. Like it's great, and obviously we all went to Carolina. We understand kind of what it means and why it's important to so many people. But do you think we'd be talking about the Carolina family if Carolina's basketball program was Clemson? Would it be that important? we'd be like, oh, we got to hire a Clemson guy because Clemson people are the best. No, it's because Carolina has won and they've won consistently. They've had two of the five best coaches of all time. And, I think that is why you go out and whatever happens, you try to get the best coach possible because great coaching leads to wins and wins lead to culture. Losses don't ever lead to culture in my experience. Maybe that's happened somewhere, but losses aren't like, oh, we got such a great culture because we've lost a lot. That's just not that's not the way it works. So I think you go out and you hire the best coach possible. That coach will understand that as a part of his job, he has to embrace the Carolina family. He does not have to acquiesce to it in every instance. I think that's going to be kind of a very specific thing moving forward. Like just because the Carolina family is there doesn't mean he has to do everything the Carolina family says. He's the head coach. He should have autonomy, but you have to respect it and have to understand and recognize and revere it. So to me, that's where it should be. And then again, if you're talking about someone in the family, like who who again we're talking I don't want to name names because that's I'm not trying to be rude or anything, but who that has played for Carolina or graduated from Carolina would you say if they hire this person, he will get Carolina back to the mountaintop and be one of the five best programs in college basketball? And there's not anyone you would feel confident
Right.
um answering that question with. So you go outside the program and you make sure that, like I said, they understand all that Carolina is, was, and hopes to be, how Carolina does things, and then you incorporate that into that coach's style, and then you're off and running. And one last thing, Joey, I know we're about to go. I'm to me, this is gonna sound controversial to some, but on the Hubert Davis front, I do not think Hubert Davis is a bad basketball coach. I really don't. And I know people are going to say, what are you talking about? Look at the results. I don't think he's a bad basketball coach. I think at Carolina, for 54 of the last 65 years, they've had Hall of Fame, great, elite, all time coaches. And we're talking about standard. When that's the standard for 54 of 65 years, like solid, average, those aren't good enough. It has to be great. And so I just want to make sure I put that out there because I really don't think Hubert's a bad coach. He's just not a great one. And UNC requires a great coach.
Man, what a great way to wrap things up on. I think that's dead on, man, and that's why I'm such a fan of you and Sean. Hey, look, we had 1,130 people tonight. Um, I am grateful for all of y'all for being here. And hey, shout out to at TimmyAnn4931 in the chat. Appreciate you listening. Um, we will be back very, very soon. There is a ton of activity right now, like Sherrell said. It's traffic, it's action. There's a lot of stuff. Um, you're tuned into the right place, guys. Again, 75% off right now. You can join the community at Inside Carolina. The best reporting about UNC sports, the best message board community that you're going to find. And trust me, when you have a coaching change, you want to be a member of IC. So go ahead and get on that. 75% off right now. You can join. Get in there with us. We've seen a lot of folks come over this week. And yeah, come on, join us. Why not? Until next time, there's plenty to cover. Tommy and Greg will have your dailies coming up. All the baseball stuff. North Carolina just got a national champion in fencing today. There's so much stuff happening around athletics. The women are on to the Sweet 16 after beating Sherrell's favorite, Brenda Fries, today in Carmichael Auditorium. Just go ahead and subscribe to Inside Carolina. Thank me later, I promise. Shout out to Salvios for delivering this here show. Appreciate Tommy Ashley and Ben Sherman for the help on the back end. But yeah, make sure you guys are following us on all of the social platforms. Subscribe, rate, review, all of that. We're thankful for you. Glad you're here. For Sherrell McMillan and for Sean Moran, I'm Joey Powell for Inside Carolina. We'll talk to y'all very, very soon. Y'all make it a great week.